Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. What is the most unnerving/creepy place you have ever been to? Why? I'm not spiritual or religious in any way, shape or form, but when I went on a school trip to the place the Nuremberg rallies were held, I literally couldn't go closer than 5 feet to the outcrop/podium Hitler did the speeches from. It genuinely felt like magnetic repulsion when you try to put the same poles of a magnet together. I felt so unsettled. I went to one of the ghost cities in China. Housing for tens of thousands of people, completely empty. Storefronts that stretched for miles, nothing in them, windows dark. A daycare center with children's toys scattered inside but silent, doors standing open, no staff, no children. I was there for hours but only saw 2 people, minding a few shelves in a mostly empty store that sold non-perishable groceries. It was surreal. Like walking into a Silent Hill game. Cairo, Illinois. The whole town seems abandoned and has rusted out bridges and buildings with boarded up windows and chipped paint. I stopped at a gas station in town and everyone seemed miserable and unfriendly. I went to Auschwitz, and before I went my grandma told me something her sister told her, she visited years ago, that it's a place where no birds sing. She was right, Auschwitz has field/forest areas but there's no birds, no wildlife at all, just silence. I mentioned this to our tour guide. He said the animals left due to the smell of burning bodies and they never came back. The trees also looked strange, almost dead. It wasn't creepy as such but it just felt empty. Standing in the gas chamber made you feel emptiness. You could see the scratch marks on the walls from people dying. Whilst it's difficult, I recommend you go, if possible. My dad and I were invited to stay the night at our cousin's dear lease with him and his family. We had tons of fun dicking around outside all day, but the hunting cabin we stayed in that night was this creepy old one-room farmhouse plopped down in the middle of an overgrown clearing that was freezing cold and had the creepiest looking metal beds and rickety chairs. Got woken up in the middle of the night by a cougar screaming and nearly pissed myself lying there in the dark expecting some banshee to pop up at the foot of the bed. An abandoned house in the middle of the forest. It was spooky and was in ruins. I was with my friend and we were just exploring the little forest when we stumbled upon it. Noped out of there because anybody could have been in there. I find places that are usually crowded become creepy when you are the only one present. Public squares, train cars, schools, etc. There's a McDonald's on Guam built on top of a mass grave we buried Japanese soldiers in. Staff swear they see ghosts all the time. I went on an overnight campout event at a local zoo with my best friend and her family when I was a kid. This is not an AskReddit zoo, more of a family-owned roadside attraction. The newer exhibits are natural and high quality, the older ones look like barren prison cells. Some of the animals had obvious psychological issues from their poor exhibits, though the staff seemed caring. We got to go on a nighttime tour of the zoo, which meant the more nocturnal animals were a lot more active than usual. It was pitch black with no artificial light but the keeper's flashlight. I'll never forget the terrifying sight of a mountain lion's glowing eyes looming out of the darkness. Its enclosure was set back in a wooded area and I didn't even know we were near another exhibit. I actually peed my pants, though nobody noticed because the zoo already smelled like pee. During the night, there was a horrible thunderstorm that poured rain into the tiny tent that my friend and I shared. The animals went haywire during the storm. Grizzly bears growling, lemurs screeching, lions roaring, all so loud that I was terrified they'd broken out of their cages and were going to kill us. The closest thing I can compare the sound to is a demon-possessed rainforest cafe. I didn't sleep all night. Despite the eeriness, it was certainly an unforgettable and exciting experience. A few years later, a poorly trained zookeeper was badly mauled by a jaguar and the mountain lion I'd encountered was dragged out of its badly constructed enclosure and killed by wolves in the enclosure next door. A house in the Bahamas me and a friend drunkenly explored with the guy responsible for it. Kid who lived there before had gone off the deep end and written Bible verses and some other stuff about the voices all over the walls before killing himself. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Saw Al Capone's cell, which is where he was when he began being haunted by the ghost of Jimmy Clark, whom he had murdered. Walking through the whole jail, you can feel the history. I went to the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia on a field trip. It was both incredibly creepy and also fascinating. One of the highlights was the mausoleum of the Richmond Vampire Hotel up in northern New Hampshire. The outside of the hotel and the nature is pretty during the day, but the place gets so dark you can see 15 feet in front of you at night. I think it triggered something in me because now I feel like I have to be in a very populated place to feel safe. I live in Houston. The ruins of an old mansion when I was camping. I was young and afraid of a lot of things, mostly darkness. Ukraine, Chernobyl zone, Pripyat. Obviously, a faked place in the sense that they have added some props just to make the place more interesting, but overall the place is just stuck in the 1980s, which makes it at the same time fascinating, but even unnerving because it is out of place. At certain periods on each day, it gets its own unique feeling. The overall majority of Central to Eastern Europe is still stuck in the 20th century architecture-wise, but it at least has people. A shocker, I know, lol. Chernobyl zone does not have many residents, which makes it creepy. It wasn't really creepy when I went there, more before I arrived. My family and friends had decided to go on holiday to Scotland. My parents booked a self-catering cottage that was big enough for us all to stay together. It looked like a really lovely place to stay, and was a sizable place. It was only after they had already booked that we found comments on the internet that it was haunted by a ghost called Wendy. So we ended up staying for 7 days in this haunted cottage in the Grampians. We didn't encounter any ghostly sighting during our stay, but I decided to leave a jokey message in the visitor's log as a laugh, claiming that we had. There were stores in the French Quarter of New Orleans that put off some kind of field or force that made my hair on my arms, neck, everywhere really stand up. One of the few times I've sensed what I felt to be evil. I've driven cross-country a few times and some of the ghost towns in the southwest are very creepy. You can say me that there are some signs of life and people about, but you really can't envision what daily life is like in these places that just feel so abandoned. Some towns that stick out are Big Spring, Texas, Toyah, Texas, a lot along the border on I-10 in West Texas, Lordsburg, New Mexico, and a few around Arizona in both I-10 and I-40. It reminds me of that game Shivers 2, Harvest of Souls, where you explore an abandoned town in the Arizona desert that's been terrorized by some kind of crazy shaman or something. That game did a great job of capturing this atmosphere, and when I explored these towns myself, the similarity in ambience and feeling was uncanny. The State Asylum. It's converted into offices now, and I knew an employee who brought me in. Tracks in the ceiling from curtains that once separated beds, cages still on the windows that you need to unlock before opening. Tubs in the tub room, etc. Patient rooms have heavy doors, cinder block walls, and were incredibly small with a tiny square window. Tunnels underneath. The creepiest place I've ever been, by far. A graveyard at night is a scary place. Walked across the San Isidro pedestrian bridge to Tijuana, creepy folks on the Mexican side. Made a beeline back across to the US. Terezin. It was an interim camp, where the Nazis sent the Jews before transferring them to concentration camps, and the place where they filmed propaganda for international media. The creepiest thing about it was probably that people were living in Terezin. They didn't want to leave despite the history. There's even an active post office. A long time ago at a wedding, me and my friends were messing around in the elevator and going to whatever random floor. Well, this one time it opened up to this teeny little room with no windows and a ceiling just barely taller than my head. Everything was red, the carpet, the walls, and a chair and a desk in there. There were all these expensive looking golden things everywhere too, and it smelled weird. It seemed really sketchy for some reason, and it felt like someone was watching us, and we immediately went to another floor and forgot about it. But that is the creepiest place I've ever been, and I still can't figure out why it freaked us all out so bad. Camp Fatima, Gilman to NH, here in the back towns of New Hampshire. During the summer it is a camp for boys. It's about half a mile off a back road in the town, and when you turn into it you drive down a road for a minute or two with giant trees on either side, which is honestly terrifying at night when the only source of light is your headlights, and if you were a broke teenager like I was at the time, you had cheap as FCK headlights that just illuminated around 5 feet in front of you. At 17 I was very much into ghost hunting with my friends and heard tales of the camp being supposedly haunted. We had decided on a Saturday night in late fall when we knew that the camp was closed for the season and all cleaned up to adventure, but we're kids and Anthony, name changed for reasons obviously, Mom was dating a cop on the force. Well, we all decided that on this full moon night to each go into the church. Alone, a couple of my friends go in and come out a couple minutes later having no issues. Then comes my turn. So a bit of backstory on me: I am 5 feet tall and at the time 105 pounds soaking wet, and a f***ing coward. That's about it on the backstory. Anyways, my turn comes and I enter the building and my friends close the double doors behind me. I'm standing in there, without a flashlight, but can make out the pews in the moonlight. It was about a minute later I heard footsteps from inside and what I thought to be was someone praying? In a mumbled voice. I slowly start freaking out but trying to calm myself at the same time. Then I hear footsteps again and look towards the area I heard them from to see multiple people, sitting in the pews with heads down. I started panicking and booked it to the doors, obviously scared shitless. I made it outside, visibly shaken, looking back into the empty church from the stairs. My friends asked what happened in there. I couldn't speak, I just had to get off the property. I forced everyone to leave at that point and was only able to tell them what exactly happened once we got back to Anthony's house. I told them about the steps, the praying, and the people in the pews. I'm not sure why this place is haunted honestly, be it because the land in general or the graveyard that attached about a mile outside of the camp down the road. But all I know is that this was the last time I stepped foot into that place. The funeral home my nan was at, the lights wouldn't stop flickering in the room my nan was in. My mom tried to explain it away as the funeral home's generators, as it was a small family-run funeral home in the middle of the countryside, so it was likely just stopping and starting for some reason. But the thing that got me is it was only the lights in the room my nan was in, and it started halfway through our visit and stopped as we left. Nothing more creepy for me than an abandoned tile factory, as it was 40 to 50 years since it was abandoned. Everything felt like it was out of their time. Very strange experience. My great-grandma's home. It was the kind of place that was stuck in time. Everything still seemed to be from the 1920s. It was a nice enough place to stay during the day, but I always hated spending the night there. Easily could have been the site of some horror movie if they hadn't rebuilt the place after she passed away and we sold the property. In a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, Montana, the town was leveled by fire in the early 1900s and they moved everything into their basements. They had speakeasies, brothels, stores, offices, everything. They do tours and have like mannequins and stuff in the actual basements. It's extremely unnerving, and I think I'm very in tune with feeling spirits or whatever you want to call it, and it was so weird the entire time. I would 100% do the tour again, lol. It was also just myself, my fiance, and the tour guide, so that could have made it creepier, lol. I have two. A hotel I stayed at in Roanoke, Virginia. The Roanoke Hotel. Something was just off about the room I stayed in, and it was spooky and just felt very heavy. A house that was abandoned that my friends and I found while walking in the woods when I was a teenager. It was half falling in, and it's amazing we didn't fall through the floor in some spots. It smelled like an animal had crawled in there and died. There was an old fridge in the kitchen that one of my friends decided to open, and there were mason jars full of bones and other nasty stuff we noped out. Sloss Furnace in Birmingham, Alabama, USA. My parents took brother and me for a tour when we were kids. I can't put my finger on exactly what it was, but there was one section of the self-guided tour where my stomach dropped and I just had this oppressive sense that something was wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to be there and was intruding. When we left that section, the feeling went away. I've never been back and don't intend to go again. I still don't know what it was, but my gut reaction was to get the hell away from that place. Death Valley. Last year my family went out west. It was maybe 2 in the morning and we got out to look at the stars. It was so pretty because there was no light pollution, but it was so quiet. And we had our backs to the car so we couldn't get pounced on by something. Another one was in South Dakota. We went on this trail that wasn't open to the public, and we were walking and it was pretty, but when we were heading back we all got this overwhelming feeling that we were being watched/stalked. We got back to the car and we never went to non-public trails again. Nature is so creepy sometimes. Iowa. The place is chock full of creeps. It's really unnerving. If you made it to the end of the video, Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.